Thank you so much, everybody. All right, great. So let me get straight into it. I have 10 minutes, so I will try to speak as quickly as I can, just so that we don't overrun on the time. So what I wanted to share today really is how pathways for accelerating growth and investments, growth for women rather, through trade and investments. And the lens that I'll be using is the African Continental Free Trade Area. I'm sure most of you have heard about it. It's one of the most seminal pieces of legislation and interventions that we have as a continent to transform the economic fortunes of of Africa. So the point is, we want to have global partnerships that are going to also drive the success of this program, the success of this integration program, as well as change the fortunes of Africa, as mentioned. Okay, there we go. Now, the first point that I want to make is in talking about why we need to create economic pathways for women is just to really always remind ourselves and reinforce the fact and the point that women really are innovative. We are creative, we're entrepreneurial, and we have the necessary spirit for driving economic growth. So it's always, for me, important that governments are mindful that sluggish growth rates won't necessarily happen if we are not deliberate about bringing women into the fore and into the forefront of the economy. We are firm believers in our department where I work that empowering women is really going to unlock potential as job creation and contribution to GDP. Now, there's a huge opportunity that we are all working towards, and the opportunity of the fact that by 2030, Africans or people of African descent will constitute 42% of global youth. The whole world, when you count the youth, 42% of them will be African. And of course, majority of them will be women. So the question then becomes, how are we going to leverage this youth dividend and make sure that we've got supportive mechanisms behind that? The calculations that have been done, I believe it's the World Bank, is that Africa could reap about $500 billion per year for the next 30 years if we invest in the youth now. Right now, we only get returns of $800 million as per current investment. So there is fundamental underinvestment in women and youth. So this is to provide the context of why we want to be deliberate around the positioning of women entrepreneurs in the programs that we work on, and in the programs that we drive as African governments. Now, one of the key things that we need to do, of course, is to make sure that we position women in high growth industries and sectors, and provide the necessary support. Some of those that we are working towards include ICT, agriculture, renewable energy, creative industries, tourism, and hospitality. Now, the second big area of opportunity is around the integration of Africa itself. African regional integration and trade. And what we are doing in that space is we are promoting the benefits of regional integration among African countries, among women, women in our domestic locales, women in the diaspora, such as yourselves, and global women, as it were. And what we're doing as well is to encourage women entrepreneurs to explore trade opportunities within the African Continental Free Trade Area. And of course, other regional trade agreements. I think most of you are in Europe. We would have, for example, an economic partnership agreement with the EU that also has its own, benefits that we can talk about perhaps for another session, Tuluane, if that's what would interest you, on how the EPA is also an economic opportunity. But at this point, the game changer for us is the African Continental Free Trade Area. So that's what I'll be focusing on in the subsequent slides. Now, why do we need to have this? I think, we need to start with the problem statement and the numbers that we need to make sure we improve upon. Right now, where we are as an African continent, we constitute 17% of the global population, the entire continent. I think we're around 1.2 billion people at this point. However, we only constitute 3% of global trade. as an entire continent. We only contribute 2% to global manufacturing. And currently among ourselves, we only trade at a level of 16%. I mean, it varies depending on who you read. Some will tell you 16%, some will say 18%. But either way, it's still fundamentally low compared to, what Europeans are trading among ourselves. Intra-European trade is 60% of all trade that happens with countries of Europe, as an example. In North America, I believe it's upwards of 80%. Between Canada, Mexico, and the USA. Similarly, in Asia, it's in the region of about 55, 60%. So 16% for an African continent to trade among itself is indicative of an issue and a problem that we need to address. And that is the reason why the Continental Free Trade Area or Free Trade Agreement is in place to really reverse these numbers and to make sure that, we contribute more to global trade, we contribute more to global manufacturing, and we improve the levels of intra-African trade. Now, what is the AfCFTA or Continental Free Trade Area or Agreement? It is a legal framework, or it creates a legal framework that aims to remove barriers and unlock opportunities for trade and investment. So this agreement, what it does for business persons is that it, for the first time, provides a predictable, it's a predictable environment that we are creating for the whole continent, and not just, regionally to say, okay, SADC, ECOWAS, etc. The entire continent, when anybody wants to trade with us, you would know what are the tariffs that are applicable. You would be able to know, now we are finalizing the investment protocol, for example. What is the investment climate and the regulation and the dispute settlement mechanism that will be available to me as an investor in Africa? For example, it's quite a wide and a far-reaching agreement that has a number of protocols. Services, movement of people will be discussed at a later stage. We have finalized the issue of trading goods. So when we say it's a game changer, it really is. So it's quite important that we leverage it to create regional value chains in Africa, to mobilize for investments on the African continent, to mobilize for intra-African trade, and of course for exports of African products to the rest of the world. And we firmly believe that women and youth-owned businesses will benefit from the CFTA considerably. Quick run through. What this market will do, it will grow, well, currently 1.3 to 1.7 billion, depending on who you ask. That's the number of Africans, the African population. And we have a GDP of 6.7 trillion US dollars right now, or rather 6.7 trillion in consumer and business spending. Now, by 2050, we're expected to be 2.5 billion people as Africans, and our spending to have reached 16.12 trillion US dollars. So again, there's an opportunity there for doing business with the continent and leveraging the consumer market that we present. I'll skip this, but this really just reiterates the importance of women. Women account for 90% of the labor force in the informal sector. So it's important that women are made central and participate meaningfully in this big opportunity. Is it moving? Yes, no? Okay, there we go. Now, the question that I always get is, yes, we hear you. We have this CFTA, but where exactly are the opportunities? What can we leverage right now immediately? And what could be possible in the long term? So right now, we have identified 4 high potential sectors that have been adopted at the level of the Continental Free Trade Area. The ministers and the presidents of Africa have agreed to this as the high growth sectors in the short to medium term, as we expand on other sectors. And these ones are automotives, agriculture, agro-processing, pharmaceuticals, transport, and logistics. And together, these sectors, they represent 130 billion US dollars in goods and services imports. So there's huge opportunity here to either invest. I need somebody to mute. I can hear somebody breathing. To either invest and or to supply the goods that will be necessary to strengthen the value chains in these 4 sectors. So these four test sectors, we are clear that they are high potential for investment. So those that are looking to say, okay, I wanna do business with Africa, where should I go? It would be useful that you also look at opportunities specifically in the four sectors. There's already political will behind them. They've been, assessed for impact, and value chains have been identified. So you can also see where you place yourself in the value chain. Now, let me start with automotive, just a quick summary. Right now, this sector is expected to grow by 40% by 2027, right? Across the continent, we've got annual demand of 2.4 million motor cars and 300,000 commercial vehicles. And this demand is growing, and it's increasingly going to continue to grow. So components will be necessary. Supply of leather for example, for seats, etc., would be very important. A number of countries are looking at the ban of secondhand vehicles on the continent, which has been kind of a disabler, right, to strengthen the growth of automotive sector in Africa. So you can only imagine the future opportunities that would accrue in this area for both motor cars for personal use, and then of course commercial vehicles. There's now a big growth area that I think those in Europe you'd be very, very well au fait with, the issue of electric vehicles. We are busy with our pilot projects in South Africa, of course, with Rwanda as well, and Egypt. That's a whole nother area as well of opportunity on the continent. We've got the minerals that are needed for these vehicles. For example, your copper, platinum, cobalt, bauxite, lithium for batteries and battery manufacturing. So that's a huge area of growth as well. That is an opportunity for anybody looking to invest on the continent, have partnerships on the continent, look for new growth areas in Africa, as it were. Now, agriculture, let me start by making the point that this continent of Africa, we currently import around 50 to 90 billion US dollars rather, worth of products every year. So majority of what we eat, we don't produce. Majority of what we eat, we buy from outside. So we are looking at, strengthening the opportunities for localizing agricultural production. Majority of agriculture, funny enough, agricultural produce are exported. So we export the bulk of it, and then we import a lot of the finished goods, from biscuits to, you name it, to even cured meats we import after having sent out a raw meat. It's quite an interesting dynamic that we are quite keen to reverse with this Continental Free Trade Agreement, to say we need to add more value in the continent. So there are investment opportunities in value addition in the agriculture space, fish and meat production, processing meat on the continent, canned meat, there's growing demand for that as well. We also have opportunities as well in terms of infrastructure, cold storage, that you would need to have irrigation systems, and, so innovations and high tech and new ways of agricultural production that are sustainable, quite important. So there's huge opportunity here. McKinsey has done the study. So, there's also opportunity in the fertilizer. So I'm saying this so that whoever is thinking about business opportunities in here, in this area, you think about the value chain in its entirety, because opportunities abound, from infrastructure to consumption to, value addition in itself. Pharmaceuticals is another big area. We have a demand of 18 billion US dollars per annum, and 61 of which is imported, and only 36% is locally produced. So there's huge demand here as well. It's projected to grow by about 5%, compound annual growth rate by 2027. So again, there's huge opportunities for anybody who is interested in this area of work, not only the medicines themselves, but the packaging. And medical instruments, and again, even infrastructure, building of healthcare infrastructure is another big area. Vaccine manufacturing is also another one that has gotten, COVID has triggered the importance and the need to localize production vaccines of all kinds. And as you would be aware, Africa has a lot of tropical, diseases, and we've got huge advancements in understanding how to cure them. So there's a need to then accrue the manufacturing of the solutions to Africa. Again, opportunities there. The final one would be transport and logistics. Of course, that's the actual enabler. We have to move goods among ourselves. So we have to have robust freight transportation systems. Huge opportunities here as well. There is growing demand for trucks, rail wagons, aircraft, vessels. Maritime is also projected to increase. So those that have deep pockets and would have ships and shipping vessels, again, huge opportunity. But even more importantly, business-to-business transactions are growing. Similarly, business-to-consumer transactions are growing rapidly on the continent. So e-commerce and the logistics opportunities for that to move product around in the shortest time possible, there are big opportunities there. So, what then would it take for us to unlock these opportunities for women-owned businesses? I think the most important area, of course, would be access to capital. It matters. We cannot emphasize this enough. So it behooves different governments and large private sector to really take seriously the issue of access to capital for women. Access to markets and contracts. How do we make sure that there's enough information and enough facilitation for access to markets and contracts? And then, of course, other non-financial support. So just to summarize that, for example, in terms of access to capital, we could be leveraging domestic development finance institutions and government incentives to support women, whether it's through competitiveness enhancement, insurance for export insurance financing, market exploration support, etc. Now, a number of the government, all of the governments really, including in Europe, most countries, if not all countries, unless those that are at war, we've got development finance institutions. We've got government who have some sorts of incentives. So I think it's about working together to agitate for them to be packaged and directed correctly. One, for support to those businesses that want to access the African markets and make business on the continent, and similarly for those that want to support women. And we can exchange views on how we can move this. I mean, there are great European governments that we work with, for example, in South Africa, in this area of work, the Swiss, the Germans, etc., who support their own domestic businesses for coming to the continent for these sorts of things. Similarly, access to markets. We need to make sure that, and I'm so proud and I'm so happy that Toluwani, you're taking the mission to I think you said Uganda. That matters. I mean, being on the ground is everything. Undertaking sector-specific, project-specific visits, to the continent, so you can see and find the partnerships and see where the opportunities are in the value chain in real time. And then, of course, government engagement. It matters that our governments are there to advocate for business, to remove barriers to trade and investments, to negotiate at government level if there are any issues that are barriers. So the strengthening of the government to business relationship is very important. So I came here as well from the South African government on that basis, because it matters that we begin to have these sorts of interactions and know where the pain points are, and how do we begin to, use our regulatory muscle to solve some of the issues. Again, non-financial support, suite of support measures. Information is everything. Market and sector research. Where do businesses go to get information that they need? So there's a lot of demand for non-financial support in this area in terms of information. Exporter development training. Those entrepreneurs that are not exporting as yet, and the interventions we need to have or to make so that those companies can export. Global incubation programs and business mentorships and coaching. GIZ in Germany does a great program in this area. For example, incubate a number of South African companies. That can be vice versa as well. Sometimes even European companies may need to be incubated with African companies so that you understand the doing business culture on the continent, because that goes a long way. And then, of course, sharing information on global markets through dialogue platforms like this one. So congratulations, Her Genuity Africa. So we need many more of these information sharing. And of course, leveraging diplomatic capital. There's a lot that can be unlocked by government-to-government conversations on behalf of business. So we also need to have the conversation around how best to use our governments as enablers to economic growth for entrepreneurs much more strongly. So so that's what I thought I will share with you, and really encourage all of you to take doing business with the continent very seriously, because there's huge opportunities, and we are keen and looking forward to receiving the investments that you would want to share and to bring to the continent. Thank you, Tulu. I will stop here.
Excellent. I was just thinking to myself, look, thank you so much, Lerato. I was just thinking to myself, of course, this is going on YouTube, and I'm going to tag all the members. We need to listen to this over and over again for some time to really get a sense of the points you've made, because there's so many points, and there are so many areas that we see that we can leverage on what we have on the continent. And I personally, for Her Genuity Africa, I am committed to taking as many women, and pointing their attention on the continent to be able to tap into the vast resources, including human capital that is there on the continent. So it is a fantastic opportunity. Thank you so much, Lerato. We have a couple of questions here before we move on to the next segment. So I'm going to start with the one from Ejiro Bafoy, and she asked, how is the African Continental Free Trade Agreement monitored or regulated? Lerato, if you kindly answer that, please.
Yes, certainly. We have a whole structure. There's an African AfCFTA. I'm so used to acronym now. African Free Trade Area Secretariat, headed by His Excellency Wamkelemena in Ghana. It's a whole structure of experts that are making sure that the CFTA comes to life. And they actually are the ones that are facilitating the governments to negotiate the different protocols that we need to have. We've concluded the trading goods one, as I mentioned. The investment one is being concluded. We've got a dispute settlement tribunal that we've set up that is already up and running. And now this secretariat is making sure that all of this happens. So it's really literally holding governments to account, and it's been given the necessary teeth by the African Union. So it's quite an important development for the continent that we have a standalone area and secretariat that is well resourced, well funded at the highest levels to make sure that this happens. So it's not just a piece of paper lying somewhere and there's nobody that's taking care of it. We'll be having a council of ministers, for example, in the next 2 weeks in Dar es Salaam, convened by the Continental Free Trade Agreement Secretariat. So the ministers will be there to say, how far are we with X and Y, including issues of investments, including issues of entrepreneurship support, etc. So when I say that the conversations between ourselves and governments become very important, is what is being discussed in these meetings has to be responsive and covering the real issues on the ground that are experienced by entrepreneurs. So part of why I'm always keen to have these sorts of conversations and grateful to have them is they also enable me to understand on the ground, because there can be such a wide divide between government functionaries and actual entrepreneurs. And we cannot assume that we know what your issues are. We cannot assume that we know where even though we enable the opportunity, that we know how to really realize it. So the conversation when you say to us, this works, this doesn't work, is quite important. And it's something that we take very seriously in my department, that we listen to business, we speak to business like business. I always say to my team, no government speak. Just get to the point as business would understand. So we operate on the no government speak principle, as it were. So to answer your question again, it's very, very well monitored. And there's a summit every year. When we go to Addis at the AU summit, there's a full report. AfCFTA is also a strategic financial partner to the AfCFTA. So a lot of financial support that is being provided to business through AfCFTA to some of the opportunities here. So I'd also encourage that you please check them out and see what other funding opportunities could be helpful for some of your areas of interest in the CFTA.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for that. So I just wanted you to talk a little bit more before we go to the next question about leveraging on the diplomatic capital that we have, because I think we in the diaspora, we don't do enough of that. We probably because we don't actually understand the broad role that our diplomats play in terms of being able to engage on our behalf, government to government. Because, for example, we find it, and you probably will hear it going forward when the panelists are talking, we haven't been able to break through when it comes to bringing goods from our continent into Ireland. As in, all the regulatory challenges that are there, and the issue of standards, EU standards and all of that, and the perception about goods made in Africa. So all of that are things that we are facing as challenges. And I think that it is important to take from that point you've made about leveraging on our diplomatic capital.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Or do you have a comment on that?
Yes, no, I think you've touched on the heart of it, but the reason why I also wanted to underscore that is a lot of entrepreneurs underutilize the government meetings that happen between countries. I see many people online in Ireland, for example. When an Irish leader or a UK leader visits South Africa, the strategic issues that they drive and get agreement on, right? And vice versa. Similarly, I see Nigeria, Kenya, somebody's from Kenya, Nigeria. In December, we are having the state visit by Kenya into South Africa. Now, you can only imagine the number of issues that could be resolved if they're raised by the Nigerian private sector to that delegation to say, when you get there, this is what we want you to secure for us. Similarly, South African business to do the same. So when the two governments meet at the highest level of president and ministers, etc., bilaterally, there can be real results that come out of it. So that's an underutilized area of capital, and that is such a huge enabler in doing business among countries. Actually, it starts there. It starts at government level, but what is put on the table has to be well thought through, right? And that's where the voice of business then becomes important. So I think it's something that we need to really take seriously and not underutilize, as it were.
Excellent. Thank you so much. There's a question here as a follow-on from Ijura as well. How are we ensuring that Africans buy African services and products?
It's a mindset issue, Tolu. Afro-pessimism is real, right? Afro-pessimism is real. Wow. We are very pessimistic around what comes from our own, and this is what I always say as well to even my own colleagues and my own family members, because it's like, how many times when you have a cup of tea do you check where it comes from? Is it from Kenya? Is it from Ethiopia? Do you care? And if you don't care, why don't you care? Right? The chocolate that you're eating, is it Ivorian or not? because we do have, I mean, I think it is Nestle or Beacon, if I'm not mistaken, that is invested in Cote d'Ivoire making chocolates out of there. But do we consume chocolate from Cote d'Ivoire? Do we ask the question? Some of my best clothes are from Ghana. I love the tailoring from Ghana and the materials that I get from Ghana, for example. So there's no question about the quality that comes out of Africa.
Wow.
But Afro-pessimism says to us that our stuff is always subpar. So for me, it's a mindset issue. We need to change how we think and how we consume our own things. And if the issue is about we want to improve the quality of African products, without actually consuming it and giving the necessary feedback, how do you expect change to happen as well? You know what I mean? Like it's we are responsible for the growth of our own industries, and how we speak about ourselves and how we think about ourselves becomes self-fulfilling prophecies. So yeah, so if we take ourselves seriously enough, I think we will begin to see the quality of what comes out of Africa. As a South African, for example, I'm proud of the number of our industries. I believe we've got the best one in the world. It's produced in South Africa, and many other products, for example. So yeah, there's a lot to brag about on the continent. It's a pity. The Afro-pessimism is one of the most painful things to watch, because you lose out and the world enjoys everything African, right? Except for us.
Yes.
So yeah.
You're absolutely on point. Yes, we have a comment here from Keelan Stokes, and he says, for African services and products to compete and beat foreign imports, they need to compete and win on price, and more importantly, quality, speaking to what we just addressed, plus maybe subsidies and protections as we see happen in the EU against African and non-European products. What are your comments on that, please? I think that's
starting with the last one. I think the last point about barriers to protections, the barriers to trade that are put up. Again, going back to the issue of diplomatic capital. As SACU countries, as an example, which is South Africa, Botswana, BLNS countries, South Africa, Botswana, Swaziland, Namibia, Lesotho, and Mozambique, we have a European Partnership Agreement with the EU that enables trade between ourselves. It was under review recently, and the review was about dealing with issues of trade barriers and correcting what is incorrect. So these agreements are alive, right? They are there. So I encourage everybody to check the countries that you're doing business from. What trade agreements are there with other countries? And it doesn't have to be fully fleshed free trade agreements. Some are just preferential agreements that are there. They enable us to move goods among ourselves. I mean, we've got very robust trade with the EU, and some would argue as a result of agreements such as the EPA. So that's the one issue. And
competing on price. There's a comment about competing, that Africa need to be able to compete with foreign imports on price and quality. Now that, yeah, please speak to that.
Yeah, no, the quality issue, I think it needs to be unpacked a little bit more, because I don't think it's sort of a one size fits all that there's subpar quality coming out of the continent. I think majority of the trap that most countries are in, and I would argue possibly excluding South Africa based on our manufacturing or industrial capabilities at the moment, is that not every country has strong and robust industrial capacity. So when we say quality of African products, majority of those products are actually not African. Because what is actually made in Africa, and that's what we don't dissect a lot of the times. I've been to some trade shows where there are some, a lot of African countries together. And when you look at the products and you pay attention and you look at the label, some of them is not made in the country that it's supposed to be made from. So there's that one issue, and part of why we have the CFTA is to address that, to say we want to build industrial capacity and productive capacity on the continent. So that's the one. On price, I agree. It's our competitiveness is not where it should be. because our infrastructure and infrastructural linkages are so poor. I think there's been studies that have been made to say it's cheaper to ship a product from China to, say, South Africa than from Ghana to South Africa. Right? Because of infrastructure and interconnectivity issues, and where you do have connectivity, it's very, very expensive because majority of the products will travel by road and not rail. You know, the African challenge that our infrastructure is not what it should be. So that will invariably show it up in the price point of the products that we make. And it's something that we need to really look at and agitate for, you know, investment in infrastructure on the continent. Again, the CFTA looks into those areas as well. And as South Africa, we're quite deliberate and passionate about infrastructure investment. We've seen our own challenges. We've got load shedding now, etc. So it matters. Yeah, that we improve infrastructure. So he's right about price, but the you know, such a multi-layered competitiveness issue. But at the core of it for us is really infrastructure. We can't move product among ourselves efficiently.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I'm going to ask you to quickly, just in about a few seconds, take this last one so we can move on to the panelists. Amanda says there are great opportunities to be leveraged here. However, it seems that it will be more directed at established companies who already have the facilities more or less. How does this help the individuals and small businesses who are still trying to penetrate into these markets or spaces as they start up? Very quickly, Lerato.
Very, very, very important point. And again, it also needs creativity, right? So what we are doing, because we also have quite a number of SMMEs that are not robust enough to, in and of themselves, take up opportunities in other countries as a result of CFTA. So what we have is to work closely with our large companies and position these smaller companies in the supply chain of the large companies, because that's where, you know, and a number of SMEs that export from South Africa, they don't necessarily export directly. They would supply into our big chains, ShopRites, Woolworths, you know. So it's quite important that we also build those relationships between large companies and SMMEs, especially women-owned SMMEs being a key part of the supply chain of more established ones. So that's one way of doing it, but there are many other ways as well. For example, just looking at the automotive industry, if you have women cooperatives that are, I'll just a random example, perhaps in the leather area or leather industry, surely as a cooperative, we can then position them into the supply chain of the you know, original OEMs, original equipment manufacturers for automotives, as an example. So it doesn't have to be that you must fully fledged have a factory that is going to make the car in its entirety. But that small business could supply even nails, even simple thing like rubber, you know, I don't know, rubber edging, whatever you call it. It's about breaking down the value chain to its smallest pieces and saying, where can I, you know, make the biggest impact for myself, you know, in my journey to growth. So that's how I would look at it, and not really close yourself out because the opportunity is too big. Right. Find the smallest part of it and own that.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Lerato. We could go on, and of course, we're bringing you back in not too long from now to continue the conversation. I think it's very important for us to have this kind of conversations because it shifts also our paradigms in many ways, just as you talk about Afro-pessimism and how it's impacting on us. I think these kind of conversations need to happen from people like yourselves and helping us to shift how we look at things. Thanks very much. I'm going to